Okay, so we are going to do our lab 12, which is fuzzing. And some of you have seen fuzz if you took my CIS27 last year. I know that my class, they just did the brute force lab not too long ago. But in that lab, they only use like a little bit of the fuzzing tool to be able to see that. So I want to come back to some of the fuzzing tool, and I try to include more explanation in the lab so you kind of see like this is why I'm doing this step. And then it will help you answer some of the questions at the end and understanding like the effects of the tool, what you're looking at, and so on. Okay, so we are going to download the latest version of Kali. As I mentioned to my other class and your class last week, make sure that we're at the current version. Otherwise, you cannot update, right? Even if you have the 2025A, it will not allow you to have updates. So make sure that you download and extract the latest version, and it should be at 1C now, okay? So I did that. And you can just search for, you can use the link, or you can just go download Kali VM, and it will take you to get Kali, and you can go to recommended virtual machines on the right and then download this one. Okay, don't use the weekly because the weekly one is limited, so we want to get this one. Okay. All right. So once you downloaded it, it's going to be in your downloads folder. So if you're using Edge, make sure you click Save As so it goes to your download folder instead of your temp folder. And you would have this folder, which is a compressed folder. You can right click, show more options, 7-zip, and extract files. Okay. Once we extract, we're going to have an uncompressed folder like this. You simply double click the decompressed folder, open up its subfolder, and double click the blue file. So when you have the file on your library playlist, go to settings, and I recommend you give it more RAM and processor. Now, if you do this on your laptop, and if your laptop doesn't have enough resources, you can keep the default system configuration, but just keep in mind that it will be slow at some point, right? So here, I simply click settings, and then I go to system tab, and I would change this to 8,000 megabyte, which gives me 8 gig. This is going to help you with the processes when you fuzz. And then the processor is going to be 4-core. Okay, and then click OK. So once you have that, you're going to click Start. So we did that for part A, step 1 through 6, or 1 through 10 now, and then you're going to log in. Now, I blacked out the upgrade part. You only need to do update for this one. You can do upgrade. It's recommended for whenever that you're using packages. But for the time, right, I don't want you to wait like 15-20 minutes just for the upgrade part. So it should be feasible to just do the update. So you can just do a sudo update when you first log in. So open up the terminal and do that. You are going to fuzz against your web app, which is the DVWA. This is a convenient way for me to use something that's pre-written. So someone created a web app and it is vulnerable. So we just download and use it, right? Instead of you coding and building a web app, we can just download and use a web app that doesn't have much security. So we need to install the appropriate packages for it in order to run. And there have been some changes. So if you watch the video from last year, the DVWA, they slightly changed it a little bit. So yeah, you're going to have to log in at some point for configuration. Okay, so once my system is booted, I'm gonna log in and I'm gonna update. So once your desktop shows up, you're gonna click the black square, which is your terminal. And you simply do, so let me show the step. So here I am, right, at step 12. I'm going to do a sudo apt update and put in the password. So once I have update and I would then install the web app that I need. So that's gonna turn your system into a system that's hosting its own web app, right? And we're doing that locally. It's not through another system or anything. So we're just installing the packages and all the appropriate tools for that web app, and then we're going to activate it. So we're going to do a sudo apt install dvwa-y, because usually it asks you, do you want to install yes or no? So if you use the -y, it already pre-answer the question that it will come across later. So this is going to take a couple minutes for it to update. So once we install the web app, then you are going to start Apache service. So for Linux, as we learned, Apache 2 is the web services. So we're going to turn our system into a web server that hosts an app, right? And web app simply is a way that the user can interact with the system. It could be to enter information or open up files, like, you know, how you would use a web app to make payments, you know, to a credit card or access your financial aid, etc. So after I install DVWA, which is step 13, I'm going to do a sudo service Apache 2 start. So whenever you're using DVWA, which is out of the box, ready to go for you as a vulnerable web app, you need to make sure you have Apache. Now, you can run MySQL. By default, you can, you know, it's recommended that you use MariaDB. So there are options in database integration, but MySQL is what you normally see in most, you know, database environment for Linux. So we can go Microsoft SQL, Oracle SQL, MySQL. So if you're taking database class, likely that you are going to have to use MySQL if you don't want to go with other product, right? So we can do sudo service and MySQL start. So MySQL is already equipped with your Linux release, and same with Apache. So you simply use it as service command and the start option to turn it on, right? If you don't have that service available in the operating system, you have to install it. But this one, you should already have it installed. So we just simply start it, right? It's like in Windows, if you go to the service console and you right click and you enable that service, right? But in Linux, enable and start is two different things. So you would start that service so it activates. Okay, so I did step 14. Now I'm going to go ahead and install PHP, only because the web app DVWA is written in PHP. There are applications that are written with JavaScript, with Python, with Java. So this particular web app is written in PHP. This is why we installed this, right? So you're going to do a sudo apt install php admin-y. Oh, I had a colon, sorry. And I copy paste that. So it's going to prompt you this, okay? and it tells you that it's going to reconfigure the system itself. It's going to become a web server. We already started Apache, so it's simply just reconfirming that, right? So in the case you didn't start Apache from the earlier step, this step is going to still do it, right? So we are going to keep that option selected. You're simply going to press enter. So that's 16. And then if it prompts you again with PHP admin information, we're just gonna have to make a password for it, for the admin for the PHP. So it says that PHP packages must have database installed and configured and be used. This can be optional. And so I want you to learn how to be able to set this up. So in the case you want to use the DVWA to practice brute force or SQL injection, you can, right? I'll show you that. I know some of you you are taking my ethical hacking class, or you took it before you've seen it. So at this point, you should choose the OK option, and I want to configure the database. So keep the yes option and press enter. And then it's going to require you to put in a password. For the sake of the easiness in the exercise, I simply use Kali, K-A-L-I, but you're welcome to use other passwords. And then I hit tab to select OK and then press enter. And it's going to ask me to confirm. So I retype the same password, K-A-L-I, tab, and then press enter. Okay, so it's done with the PHP part. Now we can activate the app, right? We can start it. So DVWA-start. Okay. And now in the case that you need to stop it, you just replace the word start with stop, right? It's going to stop it. So when I start it, it's going to open it up. So first it's going to prompt me with my password because I'm not a root user. So I'm going to type in my password. And it should load my browser, right? Notice that this is a loopback address because we are locally hosted, right? In the real web app, you are going to have a public IP here, and it's gonna pull that service through that port. Now it's gonna get you to the login PHP here. This is where we're gonna log in using admin, right? To set it up. So first log in after you start your DVWA, you're going to type in admin for the username and admin for password. Don't save it. Okay. And it's going to give you the setup page after you do step 21. Now, we don't have to configure the rest, but it does tell you instruction here on how to configure, like, to display startup errors or anything like that. All you have to do is to scroll down to the bottom, and you're going to click recreate or reset database. So it's a web app that contains a small database, right? And so once you click that, it creates the database using MySQL, which it also has MariaDB in the back for DB and Linux for Kali. But it makes a small database for the app. Okay. Now, the second login I'm going to use is going to be step 23. We are going to be able to access the app through that login, like the functions of that app. So we're going to do admin and password. Don't save it, because if you save the first one, it's going to try to revert to that first one and it creates problems. So don't save the password yeah, then you have to keep inputting the right password, because it's going to tell you error login, right, when it plugs in the password. Okay, so the second login after you set your database, you're going to use password for the admin account. Now, if you need to reset your database again, you can click this option. We don't do that, But if you want to practice like other exercises for like SQL injection, things like that, cross-site scripting, this app has that functionality. You just click on the tab, right, on the left. But for this exercise, what we're going to do is we are going to change the security. So we want to make it as vulnerable as possible so we can see it, we can fuzz, right? So what we're going to do is on the left-hand side, you are going to scroll down more than halfway. You're going to see DVWA security for step 24. So under cryptography, you're going to find that. You're going to click it. You're going to find DVWA security. And then you're going to change it from impossible to low. So if you practice these exercises on the left, like if you do SQL injection or JavaScript or whatever, you can lower the security by clicking on the security option and then choose the level and click submit. Okay. And you can always change it back to or increase it if you want. Okay. So once we do that, we're going to come back to our terminal. So I'm going to pull this to the right so I can see my button. So we can minimize that. We just leave that page open. That's fine. Just minimize the page. And we're going to install the directory that contains a lot of resources, such as word lists, like username and password that we can use for fuzzing, or other type of word lists and lists in general, right? So we're gonna do sudo app y install sec lists, and this will take a few minutes to pull and download. Okay. The reason why we do this so that way you don't have to create your own word list. Okay, so if you want to use word lists for like rainbow attacks or to practice some form of ethical hacking or pen testing techniques, right? This repository, this directory from SecList is great. It has, if you look inside it, there are other tools that you need. So it's simply out of convenience that we can, and it has French and German and other languages in there. So you can, if you know, in the case if you need to practice with lists that have different languages, you can. So once I have downloaded that, I can start part B. And one of the tools we're going to use is going to be FFUF. It stands for Fuzz Faster You Full. And it's a good generator for web app data. It's a good fuzzer for web app data. It generally, this is ideal for web application or web servers. And it would allow us to obtain or use some of the parameters to obtain some information as results, right? Fuzzing is about trying arbitrary data, and your error sometimes can be meaningful. That's really about fuzzing, is to get some information to generate errors so that way we can kind of see like what's going on with the state of the system or its configuration. So here it talks about the method is a way that we would send abnormal data to it. And so the outcome of it is going to show us some vulnerability information, possible some hidden files, or maybe login attempts. So the response that we want back from the system, the application or the server, is going to give us more information that we need for the vulnerability assessment. Okay, so first we can type in FFUF-H. So because this tool is already installed in Kali Linux, I don't need to install it. But if you don't have it on Ubuntu or another release you're using, just make sure that you look at the documentation and install it. Okay, so the H option gives you a list of options that you can use with the command, the application command, to run the program, right? So look at the options, right? Like, so if I want to output into a file where I can later read, I can do a dash lowercase o, you know, and then there are, if I want to do an output file format, like I wanted to make it into like a CSV or a certain file format or a text, right? I can do a dash OF for output file. And then if you scroll down and you can look further, right? It's probably better that I expand this. So you should be able to see the options. So to answer that question, it says what option will be used with the target URL? So look at which option that you would use. Is it a dash X, right? A letter that you would use with your command. And then which option you would use if you need to do a word list parameter. Okay. So if you scroll down and the list is long, if you scroll down, you can check some of the options to see what you would use for URL and also for parameters. And the reason why I have you do this and answer this question is it's going to help you understand, like, why are you using a dash W here, right? Why are you using a dash U here, right? So that kind of give you the hints on the question A and B for number 26. Okay, for step 27, we're going to use the command. And so once I download the sec list, right? I would have this file called big text. So this would not exist if the word list sec list is not there. Okay. So you need to make sure. So if you're getting an error because you're trying to use a list that doesn't exist, right? Just go look for it to see if it's there. If it's not there, then you need to put it there. If not, then point it to another location, put the path for where your word list would be. Okay, so we're going to, and then for now, because we're hosting our web app through this port and on our loopback address, this is what we use. Okay, that's the same thing. If you look at your web browser when that page opened, that's the same IP address. In reality, if you have a web app that is hosted on a domain, right, with the domain, so let's say that I have like visa.com/payments, right? That will be the URL that goes here, right? So abc.org/text or whatever, right? That will be where we want to fuzz. And so when we enter this, it's going to open up the application in text, and it tells you, right, using that text file, it plugs in these texts, the string, right? So simply it passes that as a parameter through the applications, and it's passed it as a function parameters, and it's able to get the result from the web server, which is our system, right? That's hosting the web app. Now, when you see the status code 301, in 301, when you see that, that's simply that the page is moved, right? It's no longer there. That's just like an error code. But it's not exactly like 404 or other form of error. It's just simply that saying that it's not locatable in its original domain or URL, right? And then if you see the status code 200, that means okay. So whenever we see 200, that just means that it is successful in responding for the request. So if I ask you for something, and if you give it to me, I would generate a 200 code, right? So when I do a get, if I'm able to load that page successfully, it would generate a 200. Okay. So That's what you see. And so some terms or some string, some text is going to have 301 status code. And then some text is going to have, or some, I should say some object or file is going to have 200. So I tried to put, so when you add in the fuzz here, that's the keyword. So simply that's a placeholder, right? Think of it as a container or a place where it can put other things in it. And so it tried to, when it hits the URL, it's going to replace whatever word from this text file into fuzz, right? So let's interpret that. That means that when I use HTTP 127.0.0.1 this part right here in the back where it's fuzz, if it's 200, it can plug in favicon.ico, that works. So that would be the extension to that URL. Robots.txt, that works, right? But if I put in docs here where fuzz is, it doesn't work, right? So you get a 301. So you get what I mean? So when you go to a website, you know how you have abc.org/payments, for example, right? That payment extension to that URL is what we're fuzzing here, right? And then we use a list to plug in different string, right? Like could be admin, it could be, so in this case, we try to plug in config, and that generates a 301. It plugs in favicon.ico, and it generates a 200, so it was okay. So some word it took, some word it didn't as an extension to that URL. Okay. All right. So now take a screenshot, view the results, look at which string or words that gives you a 301. And I put down what 301 means, right? And if you know 200 is okay or success. So you can now understand the output. And then 28, it says recursion is essentially performing the same task again, but in a different way, right? So what we're gonna do is we're still gonna fuzz, but in this case, we are going to try to access the admin panel in the extension. So in most web apps, there is a console or a dashboard that the administrator goes in and modify the content of that web app. So let's say that you create a web app for the user to log in and play game. There has to be some kind of console for you to modify the content, right? For you to update your site and your app and add tools to it. Now only if it's labeled as admin, this part will work. Bless you. And in the case that I don't label it as admin, right, it will generate like a 301 code. Okay. So what we're going to do is we are going to look for some kind of admin panel. And I put here what an admin panel is a way that the administrator can go in and update and modify the application on the back end. Okay. So we're going to do that here. And it's going to plug in again, right? This is the placeholder. It's going to try to plug in whatever that, so we're going to use the same list ultimately. Now, I was going to add another set of steps into this, right? Using Wayback URLs, but Wayback itself has problem. It's written in Golang and there's maintenance issues. So I went down that rabbit hole for like an hour and a half, and then I ended up abandoning it because, yeah, it might be like, so if normally when you see fuzzing, a lot of times people recommend you to use Wayback URL. Yes.
If the restart might be, anytime I input any of the commits, then I'm not getting the same
Yeah, you probably want to, it might be hanging on to some processes from earlier, even if you restart it, because the host is still trying to execute that before you execute it from software to hardware level. So, I know this answer is lame. You probably have to restart the game. Like scrap it. So that's what happened to me yesterday. I was trying to run multiple processes to test different things. Yeah, and it was not giving me the output. Unfortunately, that's like that with something that we do. And I also tried to uninstall packages and reinstall the package. That took me a long time too, but that didn't work either. Somehow with VirtualBox, the way the software is written, I think the state of it, because it saves it as a previous file in the log, it always reverts back to that. And I try to also delete that, but I think that it remembers that this is RAM for that, right? So it's a faster way to execute, because it's already placed on RAM, so it just go back and fetch it there. So even if you reverse it, it still revert back to that state. And that's my explanation for it. Yeah, so I ended up doing like 3 virtual machines over again because I was like trying to test different things and it was hanging on the process. So yeah, so I see what you're saying. But now you can go through the process quickly just to set it up and then go directly to that part. Okay, so when you run this, right? Let's try running it. So when you see this, right, we don't have any kind of 301 code or 200 code. The codes are listed here. Then that means that we don't have an admin console that is called admin. Okay. So if you look at what you're fuzzing, you're looking for admin and then you're plugging in different value here. You're looking for an admin console, maybe an administrator can interact with the app that way on the back end. It doesn't spit out anything here. It says the job is executed, it's done, it plugged the words in, nothing happens. This is a recursive function that it's using, right? The way that we created the command. So if you don't see any subsequent output with the status code, that means that you don't have an admin console for that particular app, right? Yeah, you're gonna generate, you can fuzz sometimes, and you might not have all the output. So we're gonna try different techniques to kind of obtain information about that particular app or that server. Okay, any question? So now we're gonna look for files, right? In many websites, right, including Canvas, many websites, web app, they would include starting with the landing page, index.html, right? So it's gonna load that file, it's gonna serve that file to your system, and your browser is gonna take that and open up the page for you to see. That's how you're able to see the landing page, right? Like when you type google.com, right? Google index.html, the initial file gives you that landing page, right? If you go and download some kind of file, or you saw login.php, right? So there are a lot of files that are integrated into the web app. So we are going to look for content of the web app. And I use a different word list here, as you can see, right? But you're welcome later on, if you want to explore more, you can go into that folder and I'll show you how later. The path is right here, right? Sec list discover. So this from USR all the way to the, so the subfolder, you can find a lot of different lists. So notice that I'm using a different list. So if one list doesn't work for you, you can customize the list, you can edit the list, you can download another list, you can use other lists inside the folders. to see if that works, right? Okay. So based on this list, what it's gonna do is gonna look for, right? So I have login.php. I know that exists because that's how you log in earlier, 200, right? But index, it doesn't have index.php. There's no index.php file. So when you see 301, 302, right? That just means that it cannot find it. And then 200, right? The setup.php, you saw that earlier. That's the first thing that you did when you clicked setup, right? That's setup.php. You see that that's 200 status code. So when you look at it, it plugs in all of these things for you, and you would see the status code. 200 means that it found it successful. 301 and 302, it plugs it in, it tried it, but basically it's a blank page. So if it doesn't exist, right, your web app, your DBWA, it's designed to only show you the blank page. It looks like something is moved, it's not there, right? Some other web app websites, it will generate an error, right? They coded it to show like 404 or 401. So in our case, if we see 302, 301, that means that it plugs the word in, but it cannot find it in the content, you know, as a file of that particular web app. Okay. So take a screenshot. We should see the PHP file. So which one did it find? Look for the status code 200. So like instructions.php, that one it found, right? Login.php, status code 200. Here's another one that's 200, about.php, setup.php. Now, depending on the web app, not all web apps are PHP, right? Like I said, so you want your command to include like other files. So I'm looking for PHP, HTML, text, etc., right? Like you can find like, PDF, whatever you need to be able to discover. So are there any HTML file or text file? We don't see any of that here. Right? So most likely if you try, if you have your own web app and you attempt this, you would see, like if you coded it in HTML, it's gonna find it, like index.html or login.html, because that's the code file that we use to be able to implement, right, the look of that page, that web page. Okay, 30. We can start filtering out like the actual code. So you can use MC to filter out. So when we say filter out in this command, that means that we are not going to include. Okay. So we're going to run a similar command using the same word list, but we're going to look for other status code and not 200. I'm sorry, 200, but not the other status code. I forgot. MC would include the 200 and eliminates 301 and 302. So you would, so I only have 4, right? Earlier it asked you like which PHP, so that's going to give you that here. The success, the okay. And then, so if you want the 301 or the 302, you simply replace that here, right, with the MC option. Okay, so compared to the PHP found in the previous step, how many PHP files are accessible on the web server? You should see that as the output there. Okay, so for 31, it says if authentication system give you specific information about your login attempt, like you have 3 attempts left, you have 2 attempts left, right? That type of information is useful when using fuzzing technique. And it says if it gets easier for the attacker to brute force, it gets easier for the attacker to brute force using a list, right? So we would use a list. So if there's generated output based on the input, the fuzz, the fuzzing information, then we will be able to see more. So you are gonna use top username shortlist.txt. So this is gonna plug in the username. I noticed that for the sec list that you download, they update it frequently, right? So it has like recent year lists. It's not like an old list. It has some old lists and some new lists. It has stuff for Azure. It has stuff for cloud, or like Citrix, certain type of system. So what you're gonna do is you are not going to fuzz into the login that we logged in earlier. I found that, so I tried that. It's still gonna fuzz, but you probably won't see any kind of output. There's a mechanism on your web app through brute. I'll show you right now. Okay. So when you look at your web app, and if you click on brute force, if you look at the extension, this is the brute. So this is an area that the user can enter your username and password, right? It's a separate function from your regular login for this app. Now, in most web apps, there's only one login. If you create two logins for people, it confuses the user, right? So that will just be where that will get brute force, is one login page. In this web app, this is a separate area and it will contain a user database. So this is where we use it. So we are going to go and complete this whole entire command. So we're going to plug in the username and a password. And I chose a less of a short list for you, right? So as you can see, we're only getting 301. Now there is an admin account. You saw that. Ooh. Bye. Good night. Let's clear this real quick. Is it clear? Yeah. So let's try that again. Yeah, I copy and paste the. So let's run this command. So you're using a username list, and you're gonna brute force into the brute force page. Bye. Okay. So there's no administrator account, right? There should be an admin account, but it's I guess because of the password that it plugs in, right? Which is right here. X, it couldn't get a response for the admin account. Okay. So we're using a username list. We're gonna plug that into here, and the password is X. So in the later step, you're gonna use both lists. But in this case, right, admin password is not X. So that's why you're getting a 301 for the admin account. Okay, so it says, did the results show any? So we have no 200 status code for that one. How many words it fuzz? It shows you that here. Progress for 17 out of 17. What's that? Yeah, I think that was the same thing with. Which step are you doing? 30? Bye. Yeah, it's possible that your something is corrupted with the app itself. It's only running that. It's not showing up. Yeah. Um. Go up a little bit. Let me see if we can. Yeah, when possible that I don't know, it's not executing. So close that, restart your system and see if open up terminal and then rerun some of the UFF command. Just restart, reboot. And see if that changes. If not, you have to like redo it, but I hope not. So reboot it and hopefully it will release whatever. Okay, so now if you want to see what other lists you have available, right? You're gonna get into the directory here. So we're gonna go into the directory. And then if you want to see, just type ls and you can see there's honeypot captures, there are other lists. But if I want to see password, you just have to do cd space ... You're gonna go back one level, which is the seclist directory. And if you ls, you can see that there's other stuff. So the folders that contain passwords is going to be passwords folder. And then there's also fuzzing list. There's payloads folder. So there are a lot of really good resources in this particular package. So what I can do is I can go cd passwords. This is extra step just to show you, right? You can see that there are a lot of other passwords file, right, that you can use. And then within that, you have like hashes, permutations, malware directory where you can explore. Some lists are longer than the others, and then there's Dutch, there's French, there's Twitter ban text, that kind of stuff, right? They added a bunch of different texts and lists that you can use. Some of them are compressed, so when you see TGZ, right, you have to unzip it. Like also this. So usually that shows in red. That's compressed format. Okay, so I need to come back to that directory, which is the username directory, because I'm going to access something there. Okay. And then what I'm gonna do is this whole entire 4 lines is gonna be my command. So I'm gonna use the username shortlist for the username, and then I'm going to use the 10 million password list top 100 as the list 2. So it's gonna plug username into the username and then the password list into the password, which is W2. So what you see is you're gonna see 301, right? Like we talked about that before. 301 just means that it attempted it, but it wasn't able. So if you see like EC2 user password is Thunder, no, right? Matrix, Azure user, Ansible, Matrix, right? So it plugs in Puppet, FTP, Matrix. So it plugs in user account and password, and it's going to keep going until, you know, the end of your list. And with that, take a screenshot. How many requests was generated in an attack? So look at the progress. So when we look at the progress here, there was 1,717. Fairly fast for when you're using 2 lists. Okay. But like I said, depending on your processor and your RAM resources, and also we're using the virtual machine. So that could be faster. Okay, so were the word list used effective, right? Did you get any 200? No, right? We did not get any 200. So with that, we did not get any match. So in the case that if we were to discover passwords, it won't be effective. If we're just fuzzing to see what kind of extension of our list or what kind of list we're using, yeah, it is effective because now I discovered that, you know, like some of those accounts will not be relevant to my app. Okay, then we have sFuzz. So when you're done with this, you're going to move back to the home directory by doing CD. And then we're going to install sFuzz. So sFuzz is originated as a script, more than a tool, but it is a way to, it's an application that we can use for fuzzing. Like, and you know, fuzzing is about applying abnormal arbitrary data like A, B, B, C, C, D, E, F, G, different characters, different values into a field, right? Into an area, or if we're looking at a web app, it's just a way to add it to the form to post, and then be able to get some kind of response. So once you install, we're going to do sFuzz -help. And it tells you here some of the options that you can use with it. If you want verbose output, that means it's going to be detail in text for the pop-up for the output. You can do -V. And if you want to, you know, do sequence fuzzing or anything like that, you can look at some of the options there. Like we can do port, we can do a remote host. So once you have the options shown, answer the question. So what options do you need for literal and sequence? So look at that there, right? Now we are going to create a config file. So we're going to do nano first bus. And I simply use their documentation for this particular area, and I modified it a little bit. So if you're not sure how to use the program, always look at the documentation. That's going to help you understand like the application for it, right? So basically, when we create a configuration file, we can apply it. It's going to take whatever inside the configuration file. Like simply, we define a literal. Think of that as a variable, right? And it's going to contain these strings. And then we're gonna, and you don't have to stick with this, right? If you want other string, you can put that here. So simply modify your configuration file and then the sequence you want. So there's like new line, we can do like lowercase, uppercase, and then all the number in sequence or however you want for your sequence. And then the maximum length is going to be 1024. But important that like there is this dash at the end and there's like no extra space between fuzz and that dash, right? So copy and paste this exactly. Like if you have like one extra line, it will tell you error for the configuration. Okay, so I have a brand new configuration file with nothing. I copy the script and I put it in for the configuration, right? Or not, shouldn't say script. These are just going to be parameter for the program itself, for the function. So once I paste everything in, I'm going to do Control X, and it's going to say, do you I want to save? Press Y for yes, and enter to keep the same name. So here we are going to run the command with the configuration file. So start from sFuzz, and it's make sure that you just have the right name for your configuration file. Okay, so we are going to do an output, and -F is the file. Did that work?
No.
Are you? Is it still showing progress? I think just highlight that part. Come in early tomorrow. I'll help you with that to finish that section. You can do the sFuzz one for now. I think that should be fine.
It's the same thing with V.
Yeah, it's this there too. I think it could be like the VM.
I completely redid the VM. I deleted everything, and it still did the exact same thing.
Okay. Yeah, maybe something with the updates of VM or the application itself. It's okay. But you're able, which one did you stop at? 32? And did you try running? Yeah, so, yeah, screenshot that will be fine. And then, yeah, you don't have, it doesn't find anything anyways, because the word list itself is not, it couldn't generate any status code 200 for that. So, and then you can do the sFuzz. But anyway, so it plugs in the stuff that I put in my configuration file, as you can see, right? It goes with the sequence number. So the whole point is for sFuzz, you can make a configuration file, all your literals, right? You can specify on what type of data that you want to use for fuzzing inside your configuration file, and you can run it, right? So these are just like characters, but you can have specific meaningful string that you can include. Okay, take a screenshot. What type of data is being used for fuzzing? So the data was defined in that configuration file, simply characters, right? And it tells you that here. So first it goes from whatever you tell for the first literal, the second literal, and so on, whatever you define for the literal, and then the sequence. Now what we're going to do is before that dash line, you're just going to add fuzz or no fuzz. So go back. I'm going to up arrow key twice to change my configuration file. So nano first config fuzz. And then after the word, at the word fuzz, I'm going to put a curly brace around it. And then what I wanted to do is I wanted to look at the highlight, right? So I'm going to add no fuzz, an exclamation point. Don't do anything else after that. Just put it above where the word fuzz is, modify that, and then say Control X, yes, and enter. So it looks like that. Okay, so once we edit that, you will see simply it's just going to be the output that's mainly different. So it says 37. That should be 39 because I added 2 steps. Sorry. Okay, so we're going to run that, right? So after we save, you're going to repeat that step. So up arrow key once, twice, and just run it again. So if you look at the top, right, after each of the literal, it just shows no fuzz because the curly brace, right, it's basically disregard whatever that's inside the curly brace. It will not output that. You know, so as each of the literal, after it passed the literal into the function and as a parameter in the function and run it, it's going to output no fuss, right? Because the curly brace we put around fuss, so it doesn't show that. So if you compare that to the last one, right? It doesn't show fuzz actually. It just show that. So if you want some kind of message, you can just add it that way before that double dash. Like this, no fuzz. Okay. So what we're gonna do is we are going to add, and anytime you see comments, those are the hashtag. So what we're gonna do is we are going to copy this. And we're gonna add it above the double dashes. Okay. So go back, I'm gonna up arrow key twice. Okay. Sorry. I have to press something. Okay, it's nano sFuzz config. And then we're gonna move our cursor down to fuzz or no fuzz, and we're gonna delete that line. And then we're gonna paste in the next section of our configuration file. So the hashtag is the comment. So basically you add it above your, make sure that there's no extra space after the get, right? The extra line. So it's basically, we're going to generate a 2-second wait in between the literals. So it's gonna run the literal and then pause and then run and then pause. And then you can also remove the first end config. Sorry, I see. Like this right here, take that out. Okay. So I highlighted the section that you need to add. You can copy and paste each chunk. But if you did just to the end, just make sure that there's only one end config. Okay, so once you have that, we're gonna hit Control X. Yes, enter. And then we're going to run. Let me repeat the other step, which is sFuzz of for sFuzz.config. So in this case, what are we really doing is we added the section, right? It's going to do 200 milliseconds. So it's going to wait 200 milliseconds and it's going to fuzz. So it's going to do fuzz directly into, right, our hosted web app address right here. So the host name is simply the IP address and the port for that. Okay, so take a screenshot. So is that gonna be the main difference? It's still the same literal that you're getting, but it's simply we edit instead of instead of just the system, we actually added the host name information here, right? Through the HTTP. So it shows the web app IP address and the port. And it does that for every single get. And that's what the line that we add here. Okay, so it's going to output that. Now you don't have to do the configuration file, but you can do directly, you can run the app itself and put that in. But since we already have the configuration file, we can run it against a domain, right? Or an IP address. So if you have a domain name like abc.org, you plug that here where the IP address is, okay? If you have an IP address, then you use an IP address. So it works with both. Okay. So we try to fuzz, right? And so what we do is we test the target and our target is locally hosted. We see if port 80 works. Well, it's going to show you the 400 error bad request because our web app doesn't it's not hosted at port 80, right? Or it's not using port 80. It runs it through another port. So when you scan it or when you run it for that port 80, it doesn't, it's gonna respond with an error. Okay. So, but it shows us, this is the important part of fuzzing, right? The operating system we're using, so the banner for our server, right? Even some content length, connection status, because it's error, so it ended the connection because it's TCP. But I'm able to see my web services version, right? And the operating system that's used on. So sometimes fuzzing is not about obtaining successful result, but it's showing result that we can add. So sometimes error can be meaningful. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay, so screenshot. And then what we're going to do is we are going to replace the 127.0.0.1 with this website, test PHP. And this only works if you have like, if you want, so this is a website that they created, right? If you don't want to use your local, you can use that domain. They created it for like testing purposes. Okay. So go back to your command, up arrow key, and then put your cursor where the IP address is, clear it, and then type in or paste in the domain name or the URL. You don't need the HTTP and all of that though, just the domain name. Now, assuming that you don't have any kind of block coming from your location, which is us here at the school or at home, to the target, right? Now, if you have block, you're gonna run into problems here, right? But it did show you some. So it says error must specify the host using net mode, simple fuzzer. So it does show you some information about it, right? So sometime, and then you have the, well, this is from the fuzz package itself. So you get an error here. I think it's because they blocked it here. I ran this at home several times and it worked actually. So I think the traffic that, it looks at it as an attack traffic from the school and it might not route it. But anyway, take a screenshot for me, show the status code, the output if you see it. Based on the status code, the server respond. So for us, I don't know. We didn't, no, this one that doesn't have the status code. Let me see. So let me try just the target on its own without the port. Let's see. So I'm excluding port 80 for test PHP and see if it takes it. Yeah, I'm seeing different outcome based on here compared to. Yeah. So it's not taking that as a host. That's okay. Just screenshot that for me and it was not reachable. And then after that, so that's the only, I need to highlight this. Make sure that I fix it later. Okay, so after that, we're just gonna shut down. Machine. and we answer the question. So upon completing this lab, what did you learn about fuzzing? We saw that we can fuzz to obtain some error, to discover information based on the error or successful response, right? We can use a couple of the tools you're introduced to that. There are other tools that are available, of course. And then with sFuzz, you can use a configuration file to set up all your parameters for the application. For the other ones, yeah, you just need to make sure you have the right options and then answer the next two questions. And that's it. Not too bad. Good night. Yeah, that's right. Above the dashes, so put your cursor up. Delete this line. Paste this section. Oh, wait, actually, delete the end config too, because there's an end config right here. Just copy and paste that in where the cursor is. Okay. Yeah. Let me end.